Welcome everybody to our latest webinar. Today we're talking about the NEC3 ECC programme and achieving acceptance of that very important document. Luckily enough, I have an outstanding expert in this field with me, who's Ben Walker, a director with CMAR. We've got no visuals today. I think the policy at the moment is try word only rather than visuals. So for those that can't see him, Ben is sporting a fabulous beard, aren't you, Ben?
And a suit and tie.
And a suit, but no tie, I'm afraid, as per usual. So, ECC programme, achieving excellence, getting it right for Gantt's sake, bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. So what are we going to look at? 5 things in main on the agenda. By the way, I'm Robert Gerrard, NEC User Group Secretary. Should have mentioned that at the start. The 5 things we're going to look at are the 5 functions of the accepted programme. Programme preparation, submission and revision. A few practical tips, hopefully you can take away and implement on your programmes today. What else you can do this afternoon, but update your outstanding program that you probably already have. Consequences of not having a programme, which I'm looking forward to that bit. Hopefully they are quite dire consequences, therefore that forces people to not have an accepted programme in place, or not to not have. Does that make sense?
Not to have. The NEC approach
to have. Yeah. And then we'll summarise and do some questions. We've already got half a dozen questions that were emailed in this morning. We've got about a dozen or so on the screen since we started. Participants, so at the moment we've got 337 people who've logged in. Apparently there's a technical blip or something like that, and we have 1,300 people who've been logged in. Only 300 and something have managed it so far. So they'll have to catch up with us, or else catch up at a later YouTube screening of this particular event. So let me hand over the reins, if I might, to Ben.
Thank you, Rob. So the first of those agenda items, we thought we'd just try and put some context to why we have an accepted programme. If we don't have one, what can't we do effectively? So this is what this slide's going to challenge, and we thought we'd draw out the top 5 of those. I think for me, one of the most important things is to evaluate tenders. If the works information is what you want and how it can't be done, then the programme is how I'm going to do it. And in there is a huge amount of buildability and elements and backup to the quality submission. Very difficult, I think, to evaluate something without that. How do we plan the remaining activities? This is something people must do because kit and people turn up at the right time most of the time. Mitigation of risk. I would find it complicated to do, or impossible perhaps, to stick my neck out to do a risk reduction meeting effectively without knowing what's happening tomorrow and the following week. How do you explore possible mitigation without knowing what you're up to and kind of the plan so far? Assessing compensation events, hugely important for that, and we'll sort of drop onto that in a moment. And then there's lots of other administrative, managerial and business related type things that we have to do, and the programme strikes me as being a really useful framework within which to sort of hang those other business processes off, and a couple in the contract: forecast defined cost to completion and also payment assessments. There's no reason why this shouldn't have synergy with your activity schedule and the profiling for forecasts. The coordination of resourcing for tests, inspections, acceptances and so on. And clearly we've gone into more than 5, and there are lots more. A really big one, reporting on the project. Okay, so what you're saying is that management of a project becomes extremely difficult without the programme. Okay, the ECC contract calls it the accepted programme, but life without programmes, did we not start the construction industry, one at the clock, 20, 30 years ago? Did we ever have a programme and a project that everybody subscribed to and followed? We used to have a programme everybody subscribed to and followed, yeah. There was no contractual obligation traditionally to actually share that with the other party. And if you don't share things and collaborate on them, then you have two versions of the truth. You also close down the ability to work collaboratively.
So you said we there, didn't you? So you're speaking as a contractor at that point?
I'm speaking as contractor and employer and consultant, anybody else.
So that was interesting. 30 years ago or so, when I first started, I was aware of a programme that was submitted. It was submitted for approval. It was not approved, nor was it ever approved. There were no further issues of the programme until about a year or so after the job was finished, when we spoke to some bright spark claims analysts.
Was there a prolongation claim?
There was a huge prolongation claim.
So
the problem with programmes at that point was, I think, the last curve, they were used as a claims receipt device, not a management tool. So what we're talking about here is about using this to help people manage the project or contract better.
Absolutely, and because compensation events, so 62.2 in how to prepare a quotation and how they rely on time and money, time and price, if you like, being presented as one for each event. So unless you have a contemporary program with which to constantly measure that, you'll very quickly end up in a situation where there is no provision for a global delay claim. It doesn't exist. So you'll disadvantage yourself enormously.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So in terms of sort of what it looks and feels like, so if the last slide just gave a bit of context around where it's used in the context of its sort of role as one of the key, if not the key management tool, let's have a look at its preparation, its submission and how we update it. So we'll have a quick look at what to include and how to present the programme. There's a million ways of doing this. Everybody defaults to a Gantt chart, but there are other ways. The right way to show time risk allowance. There's loads of things we could have picked on. The bullet points are quite lengthy in the contract. We haven't got time to go through all of them, but I think there's a couple of things here that quite often get missed or misunderstood. Floats and terminal float, neither are a defined term, but I think one of the clauses gives you quite an indication as to how to calculate these things. And also showing compensation events on the programme and how we might be less emotive about how we do that. So that maybe there's a degree of comfort in both parties where we are submitting and accepting the programme without feeling like we're prejudicing the outcome of a compensation and assessment. And then this one, which I'm not entirely convinced on, it's still going around in my mind, how we show the effects of implemented compensation events. And by inference, therefore, in that clause, perhaps we shouldn't be showing non-implemented compensation events. And I'd just like to deal with that, and maybe there'll be some useful questions drawn out around that. Okay. So firstly, what does it look like? What does it include? So we know it's a sort of holder of very important dates. Very often the reason they're italicized there is they're transposed directly from contract data. And if the first bullet point here are the contractual deadlines, then they're always paired with the kind of reality of progress and reality. So we have the contractual deadline of completion date paired with when we're planning to complete.
Lots of people get those wrong.
Yes.
They often think it's the same thing, and they talk about planned completion date or something like that.
And worse
so
still,
they're two distinct things.
They are very distinct, and one is a deadline which moves in accordance to the contract. The other is reality and moves with whatever, whichever way the wind blows. And so, that pairing is important, and very often a bigger problem I see, two things. Firstly is people don't put planned pairings for key dates, so they show key dates on a program, and they forget to show when they plan to meet those conditions, which they must, because otherwise they'll lose that float between the terminal float that they'll own.
So the planned bit is in the hands of the contractor. The contractor says, I know what completion looks like, because hopefully it says so in the works information.
Yes.
Then he needs to represent on his programme when do I actually plan to achieve that state called completion that you've written into the works information.
Absolutely.
The completion date is the contractual date by which the contractor must finish or else face the prospect of delay damages.
Absolutely, and Rob, as a fellow examiner, you probably share my frustration when you see additional defined terms being chucked in, like partial completion, practical completion, substantial completion. We don't need these because
they're nothing to
cause trouble.
As usual, read and follow the contract, not the people's contract.
So we need the order and timing of the operations, and crucially, the order and timing of the work of the employer and others. So it's really important that contractors, in fact, not doing this again, contractors can often miss on compensation which they're rightly entitled to, because they haven't shown the order and timing of what the employer and others have to do. and therefore when those deliverables are missed, they miss an opportunity there to be compensated. So provision for float, time risk allowance, they're not the same thing, and we're going to cover that in a little bit of detail, and it's only sort of health and safety issues.
Just a couple of questions people are asking, so I should have said this at the outset, but one of the questions is it possible to acquire the slides from your presentation? Well, yes, after the event at some point shortly, hopefully, we'll put together these slides with the video recording, and it'll be posted on NEC websites and YouTube and the like. So yeah, you will get a hold of the slides. Richard Patterson says, am I really the only one here? You are in your own mind, Richard, with the 422 other participants, I think, so far. An interesting one, I'm not sure the slant of this, but does it need to be an accepted program? Can we just have a program?
I think it needs to. Well, I think it needs to be accepted, and the verb accepted is important not to deviate from. So it's not approved or agreed. I think if you look at the fourth bullet point there, order and timing of the work of the employer and others, without the acceptance of the employer of the program, and 14.1 is very important here because we're not changing the contractor's obligations or liabilities. But if there are things shown on the program which are for the employer to deliver or others whom they are responsible for, then it's important that those things are accepted and thus binding them into those obligations.
A number of provisions of the contract rely upon the term accepted program to actually operate the contract properly and effectively.
Absolutely. And acceptance is indeed something that the program should show. You know, and again,
let me interject. What if on a program an acceptance is shown by the contractor as something required, which in itself the period for giving that acceptance is at odds with the contract data? So let me give it a slightly different way. But let's say the period for reply is 4 weeks, yet they've shown submission of design for acceptance and acceptance of design 2 weeks later, i.e. they've not complied with the contract. And what if you accept it? Is that too tricky?
I think I would treat it the same as access. So it's the later of the two.
Later of the two.
Would be my proposal there.
I don't think the contractor can trample over provisions that are fixed in the contract, such as period for reply. So that becomes a fixed period.
So you have an ambiguity, do you? An inconsistency, perhaps, into when I should reply.
I think the program's wrong, albeit I might have accepted it. But I think you have to hear for reply.
True. So your acceptance doesn't change the obligation to do the acceptance.
Yeah. You mentioned the clause 14.1 before. It says to me, it's completely irrelevant here. You are not able to trample over other provisions of the contract. Because two people got it wrong. If the contractor got it wrong in the first place, the project manager subsequently got it wrong in accepting something which is flying in the face of what the contract requires. Okay.
So why do we have to show acceptance in the program?
I think it helps people. It helps people at least with their diary, if nothing else. And there's a logic, isn't there?
There is. It's a
this is when I need these things to happen by the date. Fine. If you need that to happen by that date, you need to observe the fact that I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 or whatever it is weeks and a bit of reply to deal with.
And of course, whether works information requires an acceptance of a design, for instance, might be a precondition for starting it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this is really important and often ignored. For each operation, a statement of how the contractor plans to do the work, identifying principal items of equipment and resource. Now, this can't be done just in a two-dimensional Gantt. We have to put in other resources and schedules to populate this. For me, the program is a bit like a speed distance time calculation. When it comes to doing compensation events or other sort of interrogations to its realism, you can't do the productivity bit, which you need for compensation assessment, unless you've got both time and resource. So time and resource gives you productivity. If you've only got one half of that, you can't calculate the others. So resourcing is absolutely essential. And I don't think it means, I don't know, Rob, I don't know how pragmatic you'd be, I don't think this means complete full-blown detail from day one. I always see it as more of a bow wave. So as you move through time, you get maybe a month or two ahead of good detail.
That's an interesting one. So you grow into your program. On day one of a 2-year job, are you really going to know the nuts and bolts? How are you going to do
you know what,
fencing?
No, but if there's a piled retaining wall in the 100th week, I think we should know whether there's one rig or two.
Okay, so
but whether there's
You know what you know, don't you?
You know what you know. That's it.
You know what you know.
And you should show what you know.
Why would you not show what you know?
Absolutely. Great. Okay, so how is the program presented? So here's the typical Gantt. I've seen some examples. In fact, I think there are some examples in the programming workshop course of PowerPoint slideshows with general arrangements that animate and each slide is a day or a week. So there's some really good ways of presenting this. But essentially, it's almost certainly a collection of documents. Resource statements, histograms, schedules, network diagrams, Gantt charts.
Could be any of those.
Could be any or all of them.
Things. And as you mentioned earlier, just because we're quite comfortable with the visual thing that Gantt charts give us, that's not the only program available. Certainly, my first program I used, I haven't got a clue about today, is a line of balance. So, you know, different gradients of lines to represent productivity.
Yeah.
Incredibly confusing, I found it, but that's just, you know, it's just another means of portraying the same.
I don't know if this is off topic, but top tip, well worth specifying in your works information. If you can only use, I shan't mention it by name, but if you can only use a particular programming package, then you need to be specifying that in your works information. Otherwise, you may end up with program submissions perfectly compliant, but in the wrong format. So if you have a particular desire for the program to be formatted in a given way, then best to make that clear in the works information. Okay,
Thomas asked us, how do I activate voice? And then he said he sorted it. So
well done, Thomas.
Well done, Thomas. That's brilliant.
Okay, if we jump back, part of the requirement to show in a program is sort of float and risk allowance. Neither are particularly defined. There's a little bit about risk allowance. Let's deal with risk allowance first. So how do we show time risk allowance and what is it? Well, Rob, I think time risk allowance for me is the difference between best productivity and reality. I don't know if you've got a different, if you had to...
Between best
productivity. Well,
what is best productivity? It's utopia, is that? It's should the rain not fall, or should there be no resource problems or anything else?
Yeah, I think though it's not scientific either. I think it's in the context within which you're working, whether it's environmental, the time pressures. If there's a key date looming, then perhaps the time risk allowance could justifiably be greater.
I usually call it sort of sunny day rates, difference between sunny day rates and the most likely...
Blue sky and reality.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, dig a hole in the middle of summer with the sun shining, but not too hot, you know, so, versus deepest, darkest winter, etc.
So a couple of things on this. Firstly, it's important to say it is not float. So float within a program, you could be absorbed to mitigate the progress delay effects of the contractor and compensation events brought about by the project manager. So time risk allowance isn't that. It can't be used to absorb compensation event effects. The contractor owns it. It's part of his realistic program. They've got three options for showing it that we've seen. The first of the options here is on the screen now, and you can see that we just schedule out the activities as normal. So activity A, 15-day duration, activity B, 10-day duration. And then we're showing the time risk allowance provision as an extra column. So the only way this is shown on a programming package is as a number in a column. So from this we can deduce that it's actually a 12-day activity with 3 days risk allowance, a 10-day activity, sorry, an 8-day activity with 2 days risk allowance. I think this is the best option. Other options, well, this is, I believe, to be equally as compliant, but it just makes the program twice as tall, and it's all that, you know, these programs can quite often already be quite complex.
The only my issue with this one, option 2, is that why would time risk allowance be at the end of
each task?
Each task. That's not necessarily when time risk occurs. It could happen at the start. It could be a recurring thing throughout the duration of the activity. It could be at the end. I don't get why it would always be at the end.
I think for the purposes that we've used the program to this granularity, I don't think it really matters. I think that it's accepted that, you know, for assessments and things like that, that those are the durations we use. I'm not too worried about it, other than the practicality that it makes the program twice as tall.
The only thing in practicality is if you had to show a revised program of option 2, how much of the 8 day of activity A, how much, sorry, the 12 days, sorry,
Yeah.
how much of the 12 days have actually gone, and how much of the 8 days have actually gone?
Oh, I suppose if you were going to show 50% progress, you'd have to show 50%. Yeah.
Where would you know where you are? So option 1 is still favourite, I think.
This one I've been bold and I've put a cross next to it because I don't think it works.
That's very bold.
I don't think this is. So this is still showing risk allowance. So strictly speaking, time risk allowance is identified on the program. So I think it satisfies the bullet point for showing time risk allowance. But I think it fails in other ways.
I've seen these. I've had these on programs we've dealt with before, and they're problematic. Again, just because my last point is, how do you know where you are with the total TRA at any revised program in time? You've literally no idea where you are.
No, I think the bigger problem for me is, whilst it gives you a realistic planned completion, as soon as you go into any level of detail, so activity B, if we pick on the last activity B, we're being told, by the virtue of the fact there's a 5-day risk allowance there, activity B is likely to be in the wrong place by the entirety of that risk allowance.
Yeah.
So it fails for me on the requirement to show a realism timing operations of the program, timing order of operations.
Yeah, Benedict, right. So option 2 would be the case if there are key dates within the program. Not sure about that.
I think it's independent of key dates.
I think they're independent. Key date would just appear, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Usually at the end of, let's say, A.
But what you would have though, Rob, which you couldn't steal, would be, if you like, mini terminal flow between when you plan to finish a key date and the key date contractually, and that would indeed, it's not risk.
And that's Dominic's other point actually. The other issue is there's a risk you'll confuse that with float, and I agree entirely.
Mark it clearly.
Yeah.
Mark it clearly.
Yeah.
Of course, float won't be a bar anyway, will it? It'll be gaps between bars.
Lots of questions firing into this, so I'll just pause for a minute. How do you declare TRA to be client for option 1? We'll declare it in the way that's stated there. A column with a numerical column.
Absolutely.
So just say it's 3 days for A, 2 days for B. That would be absolutely fine. And finally, on this one, clients have requested option 3 for transparency. Crikey. You could option 3 for confusion. What about
option 3 for
transparency?
A lack of reality, I think.
With option 3, I think you can make a case that it was sort of compliant, but it would be an incredibly difficult tool to manage.
Do you know what I think option 3 does is, sometimes I think you probably estimate on this basis. You put your best productivity in and you say, right, okay, that never happens, so I need 60 days contingency. And a gut feel is probably dead accurate. But the task then is to spread that 60 days sensibly over the activities as best you can. Otherwise, you get a realistic plan completion, but you don't get a realistic or real timing of the activities. They're all over the place.
And then it keeps saying, last one, then we'll move on. But it reflects lean management for option 3. Crikey, it reflects
it's not realistic.
It's not realistic, is it? It's just simply not realistic. What is the likelihood of achieving the option 3 program for A and B? Highly unlikely.
Yes. Well, you're likely to meet plan completion, but the rest of it as a management tool isn't useful.
So overall your ratings are fine on the whole program, but individually, we don't know where we are.
Otherwise, all the things that we set the context around, risk mitigation meetings, risk reduction meetings, compensation assessments, resource planning, if you used program 3, you'd be planning for kit to turn up too early, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I agree.
You'd be booking possessions too early.
Okay, so moving on. Thank you for the sorry you said, Benedict. No more questions, please.
Okay, quick thing on float and terminal float then. How far through the slides are we, Rob? 10.
Yeah,
so we've got float and terminal float. So these neither are defined terms, but you can deduce them from clause 63.3. So we know that the movement of a planned completion due to a compensation event is the awarded extension of time, if you like, that gets applied to the completion date. So completion date moves out by the same amount of time that planned completion moves out due to a compensation event when compared with the accepted program. So it's easier to say terminal float, isn't it, Rob?
It is. By the way, planned is double N, isn't it? Not planed completion.
Planed completion is a...
Planed, like another term, isn't it?
Different again, planned completion, yeah. So, so this is terminal float. This cannot be used to absorb compensation events.
Well, that's a made-up term, isn't it? Or where's that come from? We use that. It's not in the ECC. There's no such term in the contract.
No, like I say, I think it's easier to say than reciting 63.3.
Yeah.
It is a protected time frame, isn't it? It's a protected period between plan completion and completion date, and we deduce that from how 63.3 moves this to preserve completion date in light of a delay to plan completion. Okay. So this can't be used to absorb the effects of compensation.
So that becomes the contractors.
Absolutely. There's no such guidance on any of the rest of it. It says to us that the planned completion moves by the amount, the compensation of
the contract doesn't mention what you do with float.
It doesn't mention what you do with float. So it's widely accepted that float can be used to mitigate on a kind of first past the post principle.
Okay. Which suggests to me that certainly the contractor would be well advised to notify their delays as soon as they're aware of them and bag the float that's available to them. If they hold back and don't say, oops, I've got a problem, I'm in delay, then they run the risk that the employer via the project manager, perhaps through an instruction, might pinch the float that's readily available.
Well, I was going to come to a dramatic conclusion. Maybe we'll do it early.
Sorry. So
your program should be possible to do a program submission and acceptance. Keep an eye on the numbers here of attendees, Rob. They might drop off when I say this. You should be able to do a program submission and acceptance within a day, maybe 2 days.
As long as a day. I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, well, maybe. And we'll look at some practical top tips for maybe making that possible. You're right, though. If you submit a program when instructed by the project manager, no less frequently than the interval stated in contract data, but also whenever you want as a contractor. Yeah. And the reason for that is maybe to demonstrate that first past the post principle. Yeah. I've used that float. You can't.
Float's gone.
Float's gone. Yeah. Okay. Let's.
Done all
so
this.
we said that. Okay. Okay. This is perhaps a little bit more challenging to consider. So what we're looking at here are showing there's a requirement in the program to show a realistic program, and there's also a requirement in the program to show the effects of implemented compensation events, and thereby there's an inference that perhaps we don't show non-implemented compensation events if there is such a...
There isn't such a term.
There isn't, but no. we'll make it up because it's perhaps useful to this.
Yeah.
So I sort of fall into the camp of making sure your program's realistic. So I think you can show the impacts of reality, so on the program, so that it's realistic. So I think the program should show the impact of an instruction or the impact of a weather effect or delay, but certainly not a movement to the completion date. The program submission and acceptance procedure is not in any way prejudicing the compensation event process. So a program showing the effects of implemented compensation events would be to show the change to completion. So if we go through 1, 2, and 3 briefly, we have a program. We have the same program in number 2, but with some sort of effect. It could be a weather effect. It could be a project manager's instruction. So just to pause us there, if we didn't show this in the next program submission and it was a reality, it happened, surely that wouldn't be a realistic program and therefore plan completion wouldn't be realistic. Mm-hmm. What we shouldn't do is show the effect of the implemented compensation element, of non-implemented compensation, which is therefore why completion date hasn't moved.
The contractor is not in control of the completion date.
No, he's not. No.
It's arguable. It sort of actually could be through the deemed acceptance process in compensation, but that's
a circumstance.
Another day.
Yeah.
But in the first instance, where he believes the project manager will respond in a timely fashion, the contractor should not change the completion date, either on the program or on the quotation. He should just be asking for change in plan completion, effectively.
Yes, I think, remember we were talking about pairing of dates, so there's various contractual deadlines which only move through the procedures, the conditions of contract. So those you're always looking up your contract administration trail and populating your Gantt chart with them, whereas plan completion is not, it's whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that just moves in and out, and I can't.
Well, plan completion could be on, before, or after
absolutely.
the completion date.
Yeah,
that's the date by which the contractor believes he will actually achieve completion. So running dates explained.
Yeah. So in summary, what we're saying here, ignoring the spelling,
they can't see this. If you're doing that, they can't see that.
In summary, what we're saying is that Rob, perhaps you share my view. I don't know about that. My view is that to be a realistic program, you must show the effects of instructions, the effects of weather, things like that. Certainly if you've got lots of volume of them on the program submitted for acceptance, but not the effect to the contractual deadlines.
Yeah.
And one top tip here, I think, is to remove any emotive thinking behind this. Don't call them compensation events. Call them or refer to them at a layer that doesn't try to carve them out specifically that might later conflict with a quotation, so that we are showing the true picture of what's going to happen.
It's a tricky area.
It is a tricky area.
You can see what the contract is trying to achieve, but it's tricky. Somebody has asked what is an implemented compensation event.
Well, implementations is dealt with in clause 65.1. I think that the word's connotations in literal terms is a bit almost not quite what you might think it is. Implementation means commercial finality. Rob, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I use the language shoving. So shoving the compensation event onto the pricing document, the actual schedule or bill.
So implementation has got nothing to do with the progress of those compensation event works. Implementation means it's either had an accepted quotation, it's been deemed accepted through a lack of correspondence, or the project manager has performed their own assessment and notified it. Yeah. So it's the kind of closure of it as a compensation event. Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Transition from a chore to a valuable tool. I think that it's unfortunate, but a lot of people see the program as being this monthly task that we bring somebody in who perhaps doesn't even sit in the site for the rest of the month. They work on bringing this thing up to speed, and they put it in the post, and then a couple of weeks goes by before the project manager looks at it. We've got to move away from this being a chore to actually embedding it as the framework for a lot of the other procedures of the contract. So I think there's a few things we can do and be aware of to make that transition. The first thing is, I think some project managers, being candid, may worry about what the program presents them in terms of liability. And
I agree.
I wonder whether often a technicality is found for rejection, for withholding acceptance, maybe through a fear of other things. And it's important to understand clause 14.1.
I'm no behavioural consultant, but I'm told that a large part of our brain likes the word no. So we're drawn to that word. We like to say no. We're uncomfortable saying yes because we fear if we say yes, whether we attract some personal responsibility liability as a result of it.
So 14.1 just limits the project manager's acceptance and supervisor's acceptance of the submission from the contractor. It doesn't change the contractor's obligation to provide the works or liability for his design. So if the program is greatly lacking or unrealistic and it's accepted by the project manager, if the contractor then fails in his endeavours and it's deemed the program in retrospect was deficient, then the project manager is not complicit in that failure. It's not diluting his obligations. And what it does do, though, is it does bind the employer into things the program shows they will be delivering. So a top tip here is to just schedule those things out. So if you've got a project manager who's a little bit difficult in terms of extracting acceptance from, make life easy for them. Show on the program, remind them of clause 14.1, show on the program those things, perhaps in a separate schedule, that are the employer, i.e. he and his boss,
they need to do.
He or she and his boss, that they need to do or that they are commissioned to.
I also suggest to people they regard the program as our program rather than something the contractor gives or does to you. This is what we will work to. We, you and me, project manager, employer, contractor and subcontractors, we'll do our level best to work to this programme.
Well, there's a huge amount in there that isn't really relating to the contractor's deliverables. There's a lot in there about what the employer's doing. Yeah. And of course, key dates opens up a whole other thing around interfacing.
It joins the dots, doesn't it? Without this, how on earth can we make sensible decisions going forward? That's your very starting point. Yeah. This is a key management tool to help sensible people make sensible decisions, nothing more, nothing less.
So
daily.
Part of doing this is daily, and even I reckon morning and lunchtime is a good time to do it.
I've just heard 1,000 people put their head in the hands at that point.
I've been watching the numbers. We're not
still going up.
Still going up. So update daily. How do we do this in practice? I think you said so. At the end of this seminar, you can go off and crack on with some of your programs. Do you know what? I wouldn't. I would straight after this. I'd go and get a battery drill and a whiteboard. And this is probably the top tip, so toppest tip of all of them, is get yourself a whiteboard, stick it in the site hut or where the guys are putting their boots on in the morning, cut it into 3 columns, yesterday, today, tomorrow, or if that's a little bit too granular, last week, this week, next week. There's your resourcing, because you can say this is what I'm doing and what kit I'm using, and then you've got that resource element. I've seen people get their section engineers just to sign the bottom of it. No contractual connotations to that. It's just good record keeping. Yeah. The guys or people who are keeping the program up to date take a little photograph of that whiteboard on their phone, scurry upstairs, update the Gantt chart. It's real time almost. Okay. That's probably the thing that's unlocked.
You said toppest tip. Yeah. Is that a defined term or needs to be one?
I think we could make it a defined term.
Okay.
And as we keep saying, you then build other management activities around it. Suddenly, forecasting, particularly on option C, perhaps C and D, where you're interested in value analysis, that sort of thing. These sort of not so ancillary, these important management tasks become. You've got a framework within which to do it, which is realistic.
And you're engaging the likes of subcontractors. I mean, Ed, the question just coming, you're referring to collaborative planning with the programme owned by client, contractor and subcontractor. Absolutely.
Spot on.
Why on earth would you want anything other than that? Yeah. Anything else is mischievous, in my opinion. Divisive, mischievous. And a programme that you keep to yourself, and probably useless, yeah. But why on earth would you not want to join the dots then?
So a little bit more complicated with a bill of quantities for some of these other management activities, but with an activity schedule, it's screaming out synergy. Yeah. And actually, I don't know what you think about this, Rob, but personally, I do forecasts and activity schedule updates. I do them against the program. So it actually creates some columns. Yep. In next to the activity.
Well, in terms of option A, you think you lump sum?
Yeah. So in my program, you've got the description, duration. We talked about time risk allowance being a column. Maybe stick another column in there for price.
Yeah, why wouldn't you do that?
Why wouldn't you do that? And then you have another column in there for forecast defined cost on option C.
Why wouldn't you do that? Bear in mind the contract tells you the minimum list of things that you should do. We've had this before. It doesn't say do this and do this only. It's here's what you should show. Knock yourself out to the other things that you should go on to.
If it was over prescriptive, it would probably go against its core characteristic objective of being flexible. So I think it's a good framework, and I think the authors would envisage that we build sensible management around that. So
I would imagine they would do.
Any more questions?
Loads of questions. Keep going. You've got a few minutes, then we need to refer to the...
Let's look at the consequences then of not having a programme. I think this is coming on to our final couple of slides here. So, huge disadvantage. So, refer to everything we've just said.
Yep.
Let's look at some of the contractual issues with not having a programme, some of the consequences. So, if the contractor fails to submit, if there isn't a first programme identified in contract data, which we already said right at the very start, why wouldn't you have a programme at tender? It's so useful to the evaluation process.
What do you think about
this is a Neil song,
the implications with CDM as well, about this sort of, you've got to think about the future, about safely looking after people, etc. Yeah. How can you avoid your responsibilities in,
well, with BIM as well, it's all going to start to be modelled in advance.
So this should become the norm. I mean, why this is a struggle at the moment, I think, is because of the hindsight of programmes where
they were a baseline and
all the rest of it. Yeah. Now we've moved on, hopefully, culturally and all the rest of it. And this should be the norm, shouldn't it?
It should.
How much of this, though, is actually taught at universities? How much of this is our, are we comfortable doing?
It's funny you say that, because I've done a couple of lectures at universities recently, and sometimes I go thinking that I'm going to get challenged, and it can be quite a short conversation, because everyone just nods and agrees and say, well how else would you do it?
Let me tell you a story.
Let me tell you a story, yeah. So if the contractor fails to submit, we've got clause 50.3, which is a neon sign. If you're operating that, then you're in a bad place. We don't really want to be going there. So this is the one where you withhold 25%, etc., etc.
No excuse there. Don't let that happen.
This one is less known about, and people like to summarise what the contract says in guides, and they start putting extra words in. The clause does not say the project manager may assess a compensation event if there's no accepted programme. It says the project manager assesses compensation events if, and then there's a fourth bullet point, when, what does it say? It says when assessing the compensation event, the contractor's latest programme submitted for acceptance has been withheld for a reason in the contract.
Yeah, you guess.
So I'm guessing, but it's something like that. So we can't, it's not an easy option for the project manager to simply to simply withhold acceptance of a program. If the project manager withholds acceptance to a program, he is taking on the responsibility of assessing compensation events.
Yeah.
Now, I've put this under the banner.
So why would you want your project manager to do that, and why would the project manager want to do that?
Absolutely. I think that it's there as a stimulus to the contractor to submit a decent program.
Don't let that happen.
But don't let that happen. It's another neon sign. I also think, though, that as much as the contractor doesn't want to rely on the project manager to make these assessments, I bet you the project manager doesn't particularly want the task of doing that huge amount of work as well. If the project manager fails to do replies, then it becomes compensatable. And I think that even with a low degree of creativity, you could put together quite a robust case that not having this program brings such uncertainty around what's going on that, as a contractor, I'm disadvantaged big time.
This whole slide to me smacks of something's gone wrong.
Yeah. Don't
do any of this. Don't avoid all of this.
Absolutely.
We need not for this to occur. This is a waste of time and money when we see it happen.
We're short on time, so last little thing before we move to questions, I think, was for me was to just identify some of the misconceptions around programming. So miscellaneous misconceptions. There's no silent acceptance. I don't know if you spotted this in some of the exams, but people have been sort of
people like deemed acceptance. People seem to think that silence is acceptance.
It's not. No. So
why are we talking about that?
Well, we're not dealing with law here, are we? We're dealing with contract conditions. So silent acceptance. Don't think it's there when it's not. It's a sanction that NEC3 brought in around some of the compensation at workplace. Completion date is not works information. So completing late is not a breach of 20.1.
Okay.
Showing plan completion later than the completion date may not be desirable, but it doesn't mean the program is not acceptable for a reason in the contract. So here we've got planned completion before the completion date, everyone's happy and it's acceptable. Here we've got planned completion later.
It's annoying, isn't it?
It's really annoying. It's been copy and pasted, isn't it?
Yeah.
Planned completion later than the completion date.
Okay, so you can still accept that.
Which is not happy, but it's still acceptable.
Well, the client's not happy. Nobody's happy. The contractor's not happy. He's going to be late. He's potentially due to pay damages. Nobody's happy, but you're not changing the completion date.
So can you give me...
realistically, the planned completion will occur after the completion date.
So what's your view, Rob? Because I've heard this before, of a client that says, send that program back to me and show me a compliant program with planned completion before the completion date. What's your view of that?
With respect, it's none of the client's business. It's for the project manager to deal with.
Yeah.
And they're wrong. They're not acting in accordance with the contracts because assuming all things being equal, assuming it is realistic and all the
I think of ostriches. I think of people delaying the shot.
I've heard that as well. I've heard that before, where the contractor's forced to show planned completion on the completion date, and he's saying, "But I'll be a month late." And lo and behold, he's a month late. So where did that get us?
I know.
Because the board are happy that apparently the contractor will finish on time. But he's not going to be. But the board are happy that you're saying he will be, but he won't. You go around in circles.
Rob, do you want to answer this question from Terry?
I may have missed this, but please advise on whether, I thought you were the expert, on whether the program including the tender process automatically becomes the first accepted program. Yes. How about that? Do you note the cautionary yes?
Well, it needs to show the information a contract requires, doesn't it?
I don't think it matters. So let me have a look.
Doesn't the clause introduce itself?
We'll come back to it. You talk amongst yourselves.
Okay.
Certainly, clause 50.3 is inoperative because
you've got a first program.
Well,
as long as it shows the information the contract requires.
Well, no, it says if no program is identified in the contract data. So, I'm not suggesting you do this, but if it's wrong, then there is a program identified in the contract data. Therefore, 50.3 is not operative.
And this is diligence around awarding a contract. If you wanted one, and you've got a program which is essentially an appendix with a title and no substance, then do you have one? Also, 31.1, if a program is not identified in the contract data, he submits the first one, and therefore the reverse, if it is identified, then that is your first one. But is it accepted? I reckon I'd probably accept it, just to...
Well, I don't think you have to, because it's pre-contract, isn't it? So you don't have a role as project manager until the contract is awarded. Have to think about that. What we have got in this webinar is 101 other questions. Please go file them through. What we will do is collect them up, I promise, and answer them within a reasonably short period after the end of this.
Last bit from me, bugbear, key dates. Employers, when they fill out contract data, I think they're filling out the template and they get to key dates and they think, key dates, that sounds like important dates. I've got a few of them, I'll put them in. So we must understand what key dates are before we pepper a contract data part one with key dates. Key dates have a very specific role to play, and they are, well, they're unliquidated, not sort of unliquidated costs, aren't they, really? Missing a key date as a contractor can have some fairly substantial issues. So if I'm a contractor and I'm seeing key dates peppered in the contract data part one, I'd be picking up the phone and asking for clarification around what other contracts are operating in the project and what are the implications of missing status for key dates.
Maybe key dates is another webinar for another day, but I've seen one contract with 100 key dates and you think, no, I think you misunderstand what they're for.
And they're
like reasonably important milestones, if you like, to make sure you're doing what you should have been doing, but they're not key dates.
Yes, and missing them has a specific...
Use them for the interaction of sort of third-party contractors. And they're a big risk for contractors because they're unliquidated.
I was going to say they're more risky
than the cost at the time. So.
And they're almost more risky than X7 on that basis, aren't they? Because they're, like saying, they're unliquidated. Although they're not losses, they're costs. But I think
that's it.
I think we've got lots of questions.
So questions. So a few more of these. Crikey. So from the top here, can a contractor increase the terminal float from the duration first shown on the clause 31 program?
He can, but he can only do it by speeding his work. He can only move plan completion earlier. He can't move completion date later.
Okay, so in the subsequent program, he might have been lucky. He might have been incredibly brilliant.
Yeah. And
completed activities earlier.
Yeah.
Through properties of due weather or whatever.
Or he may have resequenced or removed internal program flow.
So it's perfectly the program again can be changed by the contractor, provided it complies with things like the works information. So he can resequence, reorder, re-resource, do all sorts of things to make life easier, better, more productive.
And so the benefit to him.
Good luck to him.
Benefit, yeah.
Well, the client benefits as well, hopefully. Can he keep it if the client delays the project after the terminal float is increased?
Yes.
So, next one. All right, yes answers are good, aren't they? Is the client obliged to take over the works if the contractor finishes ahead of the planned completion shown in the clause 31 program?
Yes.
Of course, this is the employer.
The employer must take over within 2 weeks of completion.
Yeah.
Unless he makes a statement in contract data part 1 to the contrary, which is actually one of those if statements, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But 9 times out of 10, any job which is finished early, if clients say yes, thank you very much, I'd like to take over, put it into beneficial use.
9 times out of 10, but
the odd time
they might not have the insurance.
Like brand new headquarters. Logistics is also the 1st of June.
Security.
Finish the 1st of May.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you please confirm the current interpretation of the consequences should the parties fail to agree a programme?
I think we've said that.
I think we've done that, and effectively it falls, let's say, in terms of assessing conversation events, fairly squarely to the project manager to do, which you must avoid that if you possibly can. However, if you can't avoid it, the project manager needs to step up and assess those conversations because we want that rolling final count. Life goes on.
Absolutely.
When should we wait? Wait forever? You know. Okay, another one. What incentive does the project manager have in accepting the programme? I think this is the reverse of the question we just had.
Well,
no,
61.6
if the programme is not accepted, the project manager has the automatic right to perform his own assessment.
Well, he wouldn't get that far if he's withheld acceptance for a reason outside of the contract, or he's been silent because the contractor would do would notify a compensation event. The other thing is if his right to perform his own assessment of, or his obligation to perform his own assessment of a compensation event under 64.1 only happens if he's withheld acceptance for a reason in the contract.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps the answer to that question.
Okay, Benedict asks, what are the worst clauses you've come across that impact on the programme? Well, the worst one I've seen actually deleted the whole requirements to produce a programme. Don't think you can get any worse than that.
I've seen one that says if we fall out under the conditions of contract, we'll revert to another form of contract, which has nothing to do with anything. That's quite an interesting one.
Okay, it's not quite a question, it's a statement. Benedict said brilliant. Thanks, Benedict. There are 2 L's in brilliant though.
Well, there's 2 engines planned.
There are. So what if the project manager refuses to certify completion? So it's actually in breach at this point. To use clause 10.1 is seen as the equivalent of pressing a nuclear button. The project manager is fairly and squarely in breach at this point, isn't it?
Yeah,
there's no good reason why completion should not be certified.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. It's a compensation event, isn't it? Was it a breach of the employer? Probably not.
To not certify completion when they should do.
I see. A breach of contract by the employer, which is not one of the other compensation events in this contract.
I'll think about that one.
Certainly a breach.
Right, so let me just grab this and just randomly find a few more. Let's go to the start of this. There literally are very many programs. Right, this is questions. This is a good one. So where the contractor makes a programming error, for example, a linking error, it becomes the accepted program. How can you correct this at a later date?
Well, you don't wait for the interval. You pick up the phone firstly and say, I've made a mistake in my submission. We should say the contract's very prescriptive about how the parties communicate with each other.
Yeah.
It does not preclude dialogue. You need to get on the phone and just submit another one straight away. There's no reason you can't correct it.
Okay, so for example here, whether linking error or missed out a key activity perhaps, really important activity is completely missed out by the contractor. So the contractor stupidly left out the activity, the project manager has stupidly accepted the programme, but there's no hardship, is there? That activity is still required because the contractor provides the works in accordance with the works information.
Yeah. I wonder actually also, possibly slightly off topic, but if you submit a mistake, if you submit something you know is a mistake as a contractor, if you tell the project manager in writing straight away, I wonder whether you limit his or her ability to accept that document because you've pointed out that it's not realistic or it's not practicable.
Okay, so before you get the acceptance.
Before you get the acceptance.
Well, you wouldn't accept something that's wrong that's pointed out to you as being wrong, would you?
Well, that's what my point is, yes. It's well worth, again, maybe...
I've never met those sort of people.
Well worth putting these things in there.
Don't live in Cheltenham, those people.
Just stops it from going further than it needs to.
Okay, so if the employer reduces the scope of work, that is via the project manager and an instruction to change the works information, does this automatically mean the completion date is moved earlier, or can the employer not unilaterally change the completion date? So it's the project manager, not the employer, via an instruction, I think is the thrust of the question. Can you bring the completion date forward?
So you omit a chunk of work, planned completion will become earlier. Does completion date move earlier as well? No. So the contractual deadline can only move out due to the compensation process. There's 2 ways it can come earlier, and that's defect acceptance and acceleration. and of course the parties agreeing to clause 12.3, but there's no contractual mechanism through the compensation note process that can move the completion date earlier. The 63.3 tells you that. It says later than. So it's a change to the prices, but a later completion date.
Okay, it can only ever be later.
Can only ever be later.
That's then under clause 12.3, two parties to a contract and agree to do anything they want.
So that's not the PM, that's the employer.
That's the employer, not the PM.
And then, like I say, you've got defects and acceleration, which are two other mechanisms which bring completion date earlier if you wanted to.
Okay, just one, two more, then we'll wrap up. Who owns the float? Contractual employer. I think we dealt with that, didn't we?
Yeah, just briefly, the contractor owns the float between a planned completion, a planned meeting a condition, a planned sectional completion, and its paired contractual deadline. So terminal float is the contractor's, internal program float is any first past the post sort of basis.
Last question. I'll leave a classic programming question for a classic programmer. When would you baseline the program?
If you do that, that sounds like an internal business thing within your organisation, maybe for performance or something like that. It's not a contractual concept. It's there's only one accepted program. It's the latest accepted, and therefore it's a living document.
So not required, not desirable.
I'm not saying it's not desirable. I'm not saying it's not desirable.
What do you get from it?
Well, you might be measured on a key performance indicator against that, but there's no baseline program as such in NEC. It's not.
So we've got one program only showing what we've done and how we intend to go about completing the rest of the works. That's it. That's it. And you may well have had a very original program which shows something completely different,
which you might use to track performance, look against trending or whatever else. But
so it could be helpful for certain things, internal or external analysis, but
not NEC administration, I don't think.
Okay. On that, as we approach 2 o'clock. Thank you very much, Ben. As I mentioned earlier, all of the questions we haven't answered today, we will capture them and turn them into a mini paper and post them along with the video that will go on our site and YouTube fairly shortly. So, a few more things to finish on. There are a number of upcoming events. This is on our worldwide tour. I hope to see lots of you in New Zealand in March. It'll be quite nice weather then, won't it? Yeah, it'll be quite nice then. We've got some user group workshops in May, June, July and September. If you fancy your chances of some more of Ben's time, Ben is presenting these workshops on programming.
They're programming oriented, yeah.
All about programming. So
full day, I think, isn't it?
A full day on programming with Ben. Okay, that would be fantastic. So May, June, July and September, come and join those. January seminars in April, that's booking fast. Most importantly, the golf days in August, isn't it? That's not on here as yet. That's filling up fast. You may want to get a team out soon. There is a forthcoming webinar in May, which I think is going to be Ross Hayes, and you're going to do it on the term service short contract. Struggling to find a date, but we'll let you know soonest. We have some Hong Kong workshops in April, June and July, so you can come back from New Zealand in March via Hong Kong and pick that up and stay on until September if you want, when the end of the conference is. So what's the point? Lots going on, lots and lots of events. Have a look at the website, check back, and it would be good to see you at most of those, the golf in particular. So just a reminder, as we always do, the accreditation suite, which is really superbly gaining in momentum. A great individual way of demonstrating your competence to act in the capacity of project manager, supervisor or service manager under the ECC or the TSC. Really invaluable training program, so do have a look at that if you've not considered it already. Of course, most of you, I would hope, know about the users group or are signed up to it, but if you don't, please do have a look at this. Again, an invaluable way of tapping into a community of NEC experts, share information, helpline, events, workshops, seminar, newsletter, the whole shooting match. So please do have a look at joining the user group if you're not already a member. Here's some details for further information on NEC, phone number, email, and that's about it. at 1:50. I'm trying to stretch it 5 more seconds or so to hit the 2 o'clock deadline, but I don't think it's going to do so. All I can say again is thank you very much indeed to them. Look forward to speaking to you in the future. And thank you all for attending. Goodbye.
Cheers, thanks, bye.